Ever had something happen that's so creepy, it still haunts you to this day? In this video, we're diving into some of the strangest personal mysteries people can't shake. Stick around, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories like these. Here's something that's been happening for about 15 years. It doesn't seem to bother anyone except me. Glasses started disappearing from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was my teenagers just messing around. I'd get frustrated, search the house, even check under beds. I never found a single glass. Then I thought they might be taking the glasses when they left the house, but I never caught them doing that either. I started buying plastic Go cups and asking them to use those instead. They'd just look at me sideways and say okay, but no one actually used the plastic cups. Meanwhile, the kitchen glasses kept disappearing. When I'd get down to the last few glasses, I'd go buy another set to match the old ones. After a few years, I started buying different styles so I could keep track of what went missing and when. It was strange, everything would be fine for a while, and then several glasses of the same style would vanish. Thinking I wasn't completely losing it, I figured one of my kids might be responsible, maybe doing something with their friends. But it never stopped, and I just accepted it. I'd buy a new set of glasses every 6 months or so. Now it's many years later. All the kids have moved out. I live alone. And the glasses are still disappearing. In fact, I'm about to go buy a new set soon. Back in college, I accidentally dropped my wallet on the road near the departures terminal while dropping my sister off at the airport. I didn't realize until I got home and started tearing the house apart looking for it. Just when I was about to give up, I got a call on my cell phone from a shuttle driver who had seen it on the ground and picked it up. He found my college ID, and as luck would have it, his sister worked for the school's admissions department. She was able to get my cell phone number from the student directory. Not only that, by pure coincidence, he would be in my neighborhood the next morning and could drop it off. Amazing. The next morning, I was woken up by a sharp knock on my door. I groggily answered, and sure enough, there was a man in a shuttle driver's uniform holding out my wallet. He wordlessly handed it to me, I stammered a thank you, and before I could offer a reward, he turned and left. However, once the warm feeling of meeting such a kind person faded, I realized something strange. At the time, I lived with 7 other people. The front door was always kept locked. None of my roommates saw or heard anything, and certainly, no one let in a stranger at 8 in the morning. The door the driver knocked on was my bedroom door. At the start of the summer of 2004, I attended a friend's party to celebrate graduating from high school. The party was in a remote spot on my friend's family farm. There were maybe 40 or 50 of us, scattered around in the fields with music, food, and friends. Another friend and I started feeling a bit tired of the loud music, so we decided to wander away from the main group. We laid on our backs in the grass and stared up at the sky. With almost no lights around us, we could see far more stars than we ever could back in our hometown. After a few minutes, we noticed something strange. One of the stars started moving. We thought it might be a satellite, but then we saw another one, and then another. Suddenly, we realized that almost all of these stars were moving, at the exact same pace and in the exact same direction. We could still see the familiar constellations in their normal places, clearly not moving, while these other lights, maybe 100 or 2, continued their steady movement across the sky. The thing is, we hadn't had any drinks, and this didn't look like satellites or a meteor shower. I've been trying to figure out what we saw that night for years, but I've never been able to identify it. So, these are actually 2 mysterious events, and I'm not sure if they're somehow related. One day, when I was around 7 or 8, I was playing in the backyard when I heard my mom calling out to me from the kitchen, like she usually did to check up on me when I'd been out alone for a while. As usual, I answered back. A moment later, I heard the main gate opening and closing, indicating we had a visitor. I peeped out to see who it was, and it was my mom. She told me she'd been at our neighbor's place to return something she borrowed but got caught up in conversation. So, who or what called out to me from the kitchen? I could swear it was exactly her voice and tone. Strangely, I wasn't scared. It was a bit unsettling, but I eventually pushed it out of my mind. Fast forward several years. I was in my room studying for upcoming exams when I distinctly heard a disembodied voice call me by my nickname. I'm not sure how to describe it, but the voice sounded like a loud whisper. You know, like when someone's close enough to speak quietly but still needs to be heard. It seemed to be coming from the direction of my parents' bedroom, which was across from mine. I looked in that direction, didn't hear anything, and went back to studying. But then I heard it again, from the same direction, and it stopped again when I turned to look. It couldn't have been a prank since I was the only one in my room, and I could hear my parents talking in the living room. It was kind of eerie, but I decided to ignore it, chalking it up to an auditory hallucination. In hindsight, maybe I didn't want to find out what it actually was. A few days later, I heard it again. This time, it happened while I was taking an exam in college. It felt as if whoever, or whatever, owned that voice stood right next to me and whispered directly into my ear. I haven't heard these voices since, and I still haven't figured out what they were. Most people I've told, including my family, think it was all in my head, while others view it as something paranormal. Since I tend to be skeptical, I can't fully believe either explanation, so I guess it'll just remain a mystery. I used to work at a movie theater. One night, I was closing, so I was there until around 11 p.m. or midnight. My manager asked if I wanted to stay after I was done and watch a movie with him and some friends. We were allowed to watch whatever after closing, as long as we turned everything off before we left. I said yes and invited a friend to come along too. My friend arrived at around 12:30 a.m. and asked if I had a jacket she could use. I said yes and went out to my car to grab it. Everything seemed normal. The movie ended around 3 a.m., and as we went to leave, we noticed that all the windows on my car had been painted black. Even the side mirrors and the small windows near the back doors. My friends and I used to tag each other's cars a lot, but it was usually just funny stuff, like silly drawings. Luckily, since my friend had come with her car, she drove me home, and the next morning I went back to clean the windows. None of my friends ever confessed to it, which was odd because we always took credit for pranks. The only people who knew I was there that late were my friend and manager, who were inside with me the whole time. I guess it's possible my friend texted our other friends, but she wasn't really into pranks, so it would have been very out of character. She also seemed genuinely surprised when we saw the car. This happened about 10 years ago, and I still have no idea who did it. Also, once at that same theater, I found a dead squirrel lying spread eagle right in the middle of my windshield. My car was parked with the front facing the theater, which is a tall building and not really accessible to squirrels. I'm not sure if it was an unusual coincidence or another weird prank. About 2 years ago, when I was 18, I moved in with my grandparents for about 7 months. The move was due to some family issues, so only a few people even knew that I'd moved. Living there was a challenging part of my life. Dealing with the sudden change was difficult and unsettling. One day, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. This curious letter had no return address, and I even had to pay the mail carrier 21 cents for the postage. There was no handwriting on it, only my name and my new address typed out. The letter was crinkled, paint splattered, and torn. As mysterious as this sounds, the contents were even stranger. Inside, wrapped in thin wax paper, was a torn piece of paper that read, "Freedom is a state of mind," with a small drawing of an open birdcage in the corner. Behind the paper was a single undeveloped negative photograph of something I still can't make out. If anyone knows how to attach a photo here, I'd be happy to share the letter and the negative. I was very new to the area and hadn't made any friends yet. Only my immediate family and grandparents knew about my move. I asked everyone I could think of, but no one I knew had sent the letter. But I do have one idea. I never knew my birth mother. I was adopted at age 3 by my biological father. My grandparents have lived in the same place since I was born. I know it sounds unlikely, and I try to tell myself not to overthink it, but sometimes I wonder if my birth mother might have sent it during a time when I needed some comfort. Who knows? It's a mystery to me. The letter felt more unsettling than reassuring, but I've kept it. Mysterious. One winter morning, I put on my favorite hoodie and went for a drive to the local grocery store. I love crisp, cold mornings, so I had the windows down. I drove to the store, got out, and as I was heading inside, a breeze kicked up. That's odd, I thought. I've got long sleeves on, how can I feel that breeze so distinctly? I glanced down and noticed a perfect, clean incision in the sleeve of my hoodie, right over the inside of my elbow. It looked like a precise cut, and the edges were slightly burnt rather than frayed. It seriously looked like someone had sliced my sleeve with a laser scalpel. There was no burn mark on my arm underneath, and I hadn't touched anything hot before I left that morning. I had just put on the hoodie, which had no damage when I put it on, and left. Somehow, during that drive, something had left a perfect, burnt slice across the sleeve of my hoodie without touching my arm, and without me noticing it happen. I have no idea what could have caused this, and it still bugs me to this day. I was on holiday in Malaysia, and when I got to the hotel room, I saw the little water hose next to the toilet, a common feature for cleaning in many Asian countries, had been squirting water all over the bathroom. The floor was soaked. The staff was really friendly, they cleaned it up right away, and I made sure the faucet was sealed tightly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and the little hose was fully opened, spraying water everywhere again. Now, this might seem minor to others, but Southeast Asia is known for its many ghost stories, and I'd been hearing quite a few of them in the days leading up to my stay at this hotel. During the same trip, I had also seen a gardener at a resort on an island talking to himself at night. I was told he was talking to his friends on the island, though he was known as a perfectly normal, friendly guy on the mainland. Adding to the creepiness, the hotel with the mysterious faucet was known for stories of hauntings. I'm usually very skeptical and always try to find rational explanations for things. Maybe it was just water pressure or a faulty valve, but this experience was still unsettling. In 2016, I was living in a duplex with about 5 other people. Everyone had different sleep schedules, and there were usually 1 to 3 friends over at any given time. I generally went to bed around midnight, and my room was down a hallway from the common area. This meant I could hear whatever was happening out there. When I'm trying to sleep, I can get pretty grumpy, and I was known for walking out in a bathrobe to ask everyone to quiet down. One night, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard someone come in through the front door. The door was right next to my bedroom, and there are 2 doors to walk through, so it was pretty loud. Whoever walked in was talking and making noise in the hallway outside my room. It was bothering me quite a bit, so I put on my robe and went out to ask them to keep it down. I wasn't wearing my glasses and I have poor eyesight, so I didn't see their face clearly, but I thought I recognized them as one of my roommate's friends. They were a little taller than me, I'm 5 feet 3 inches, with short brown hair, and they were facing away from me. I asked them to quiet down since I needed to get some sleep. They started to turn around, but I went back to my bedroom immediately, so I didn't actually see their face. There wasn't anyone else out there. When I woke up, I texted my roommates to ask if anybody had been over that night. I also texted the person I thought it was, asking if he had stopped by. No one had been over, and none of my other roommates or their friends fit the description of the person I saw. To this day, I have no idea who it was that I saw. We didn't always keep the front doors locked, and my roommates and their friends sometimes had late night gatherings, so it's possible someone just didn't remember. Still, it's a mystery. A psychological episode that I experienced while living in Australia. I've traveled to and lived in different parts of the world, and Australia was one of those places. I spent about 6 months there during my college years. This wasn't part of a study abroad program. I arrived on my own. I've always found it challenging to make friends and talk to strangers, so I quickly found myself feeling isolated. I didn't have a vehicle and lived on the outskirts of a small town, quite far from any major city. My housemates were rarely there, as they often went to Melbourne to stay with family. I was supposed to join a college program, but finding out where and when classes were, and figuring out transportation, proved difficult. I eventually fell into a state of low motivation and ended up not attending. What happened from that point on is mostly a blur. I remember taking long walks late into the night, wandering through the countryside and small towns that barely appeared on maps. I'd get lost and occasionally hitch rides back with locals. The weather turned cold and windy, and I started feeling unwell. I remember being sick on the side of the road, zoning out on park benches for hours, and even falling asleep on buses. I have some vague recollections of exploring small shops and trying new foods. Vanilla slice is delicious, but I was often so exhausted that it's hard to tell what I experienced and what I may have dreamed. I don't remember much of the last 3 months or so, just feelings of cold, confusion, and fatigue. I had a few acquaintances, and there are pictures of us together, but I don't remember their names, where they lived, or how we met. Just to clarify, no alcohol or drugs were involved. Eventually, I flew back to the States. My mom said I slept for 15 hours straight once I was home. Today, my life is normal and happy. I'm engaged, have a great job, and a close group of friends. Nothing like that experience has happened since. Looking back on my time in Australia, I feel a mix of sadness, confusion, and discomfort. I'm sure I missed out on some wonderful things, and I'd love to return someday under different circumstances, but the memory remains clouded and surreal. When we moved out of our old house, we stayed with my parents for a month before moving to our new apartment. During this time, all of our possessions, except for clothes and toiletries, were stored in a pod. We packed it ourselves in our driveway, locked it with our own lock, and had it delivered to our apartment a month later. Everything inside was exactly as we left it, we even took pictures to make sure. However, we found that several items from the kitchen were missing: a pizza cutter, meat thermometer, whisk, 2 of our daughter's cups, wooden spoons, and the bottom half of a pitcher and cup combo. We unpacked everything ourselves, bringing in one box at a time and putting items away before moving on to the next. But we still couldn't locate the missing items. At least 7 people helped us verify that the house was completely empty when we left, so we're certain nothing was left behind. While I'd love to get the picture back, I mostly just want to know where the rest of it all went. In 2006, while working on an old car in the driveway at night with my nephew and a friend, we heard the sound of approaching helicopters. Curious because they sounded so close, we looked up as they approached. There were 3 helicopters flying in a reverse triangle formation, 2 in front, and 1 in the back. Seeing 3 helicopters flying together at night was unusual enough that we all watched as they passed almost directly overhead. As they did, we could see a huge, black, triangle-shaped craft flying between the leading and trailing helicopters. This thing was big, it blotted out the sky as it flew over. My nephew and his friend both shouted, wondering what we'd just seen. I was just stunned, thinking, this thing is real. It was a large, flying black triangle, of that, there's no doubt, since we all saw the same thing. It was at least 150 feet long and flying at helicopter speeds. I think the helicopters were Black Hawks, and if that's the case, they were going around 170 miles per hour. The object itself was flying low, no more than a few hundred feet, maybe 1,000 at most, above the ground. And just to clarify, no, it was not a B-2 bomber, what we saw was a perfect equilateral triangle. So, my mystery is a big one, full of questions. What was that thing? Who built it, and what is it used for? How can it fly that slow without lights or any indication of what it was? What branch of the military was involved, if it was military at all? Why were they flying low over Middle Tennessee at night? And why, after all these years, has there been no confirmation of something like this existing? The strangest, most puzzling experience I've ever had happened about half a year ago. I was working briefly at a college bookstore, and one of my tasks was to call customers who had ordered books that were out of stock to let them know their books had arrived. I'd already called a lot of customers that day and had gotten into the rhythm of it. The process was straightforward. Either you got someone on the line and followed a script to tell them about their book, or you got an answering machine and used a slightly different script. Simple enough. Until I called one number and got silence. It threw me off a little, and after a few seconds, I just hung up. I called back again. This time, I heard what sounded like someone picking up and quietly listening. But, for some reason, I held my tongue and just listened, too. I could hear faint background sounds, like people talking in the distance. Then, I heard a quiet "Hey, how can I help you today?" A man responded, saying something like "I need to pick up my book." For a moment, I felt a bit confused, until my coworker, standing near me behind our desk, said, "Hey, how can I help you today?" She was speaking to a customer, a man, who then told her, "I need to pick up my book." Suddenly, I got goosebumps. I listened for a few moments more, and on the line, I heard their conversation, but it was happening about a second before it actually did in real life. I hung up, stepped away from the desk, and told my coworkers, "I'm going on my break." My break largely consisted of sitting at a table outside and quietly processing what had just happened. I didn't make any more phone calls that day and never mentioned it to my coworkers. Every day as a kid, on the way to school, we'd drive past the mall. On the other side of the road was this big rock face that seemed to be a popular spot for high school kids to spray paint on. There was all kinds of stuff, band names, couples together forever messages, some art, and so on. But there was also, way at the top of the rock face, a message sprayed in simple white letters that read, "Mr. Stout is a meanie." I looked at that message every day. Whoever sprayed it was incredibly committed. It was so high up that you couldn't just reach it with a ladder. Whoever did it would have had to walk behind the rock face, climb all the way to the top, lie down, and spray paint it upside down. They went through a lot of effort just to declare their feelings. I always wanted to know who this person was, and who Mr. Stout was, to inspire this level of dedication. I moved to a different town before I went to high school, and this was largely before Facebook. When social media became more common, I tried to look up Mr. Stout, but with so little information, it was nearly impossible. Maybe he just never got a Facebook. Either way, I'll probably never know. When I was little, my sister and I stayed the night at our great-grandma's house. After she went to sleep, my sister and I were up late in bed talking. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, we started hearing someone running through the house. We could hear footsteps moving from the hallway to the kitchen, then to the bathroom right next to our bedroom. The bathroom door would slam, and after a few minutes, it would open, and the running would start again. This went on for about 10 minutes before it completely stopped. Meanwhile, my sister and I lay in bed, too scared to go check out what was causing the noise. 10-year-old me was convinced it was a ghost. To this day, it still bothers me. My great-grandma was the only one who lived in the house, and she was elderly at the time, so running around would have been out of character and difficult for her. Looking back, I've wondered if it could have been someone else in the house. But I don't remember anything being out of place in the morning, and my great-grandma didn't mention anything unusual. My sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. I had a purse that I just loved. It wasn't expensive or designer, but it had a beautiful design and was the perfect fit. Anyway, my ex and I went out of town for a few nights. When we came back, I emptied my purse as I unpacked: charger, headphones, wallet, all the usual things. I put it on our front hallway shelf, where I usually kept it, and didn't think anything of it. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., I went out and didn't return until around 2 a.m. I had left the door unlocked. When I got back, the purse was gone. My ex and I tore apart our apartment looking for it, but it was nowhere to be found. It was the strangest thing, and it really bothered me because I'm very particular about where I put my things and rarely lose anything. Luckily, the only important item I had to replace was my ID, but it could have been much worse. We live in a small town in Atlantic Canada, in a good area, but I'm convinced that someone just walked in while my ex was in his gaming room and took the purse. My ex and I split up and moved out about 2 months later, and after getting rid of a lot of things, the purse still never turned up. One time, my cell phone called me at work and left a message, while my phone was off. The story: I had turned my cell phone off and left it on my bed while I got ready for my shift at Carl's Jr. When I left for work, I forgot to take it with me. After being at work for a few hours, the phone on the wall rang. I'd been working there for a couple of years, and since I was a cook, I usually wasn't allowed to answer the phone. But this night was slow, and the manager on duty was in her office. The phone rang a few times, so I called out to her, "Hey, can I answer it?" She replied, "Sure." Quickly, I ran over and grabbed the phone. "Thank you for calling Carl's Jr. How can I help you?" Silence on the other end. "Hello? Hello?" Still no answer, so I hung up. A few hours later, I finished my shift and went home. After showering, I found my cell phone right where I had left it on my bed, and still off. I turned it on to see if I'd missed any calls, and sure enough, there was a voicemail. I played the message, and it started with ringing. That's strange, I thought. Then I heard, "Thank you for calling Carl's Jr. How can I help you?" It was my voice from earlier at work. The message played out exactly as I'd experienced it and then ended when I hung up. To this day, I have no idea how that could have happened. It was also the only time, in my 2.5 years at Carl's Jr., that I ever answered the phone at work. I keep getting messages and calls meant for someone named Gina. I've changed numbers several times, but I constantly receive messages and calls from her family, doctors, and others. It started around 2015, and even after changing numbers about 3 or 4 times, they still find my new one. The messages vary. Sometimes they're about groceries, doctor appointments, or family matters. Last week, I even got a call from an auto shop telling me her car was ready for pickup. The strangest part? Gina lives about 5 or 7 states away from me. No matter what I do or who I contact to let them know I'm not Gina, the calls keep coming. And it's not just one person, it's several people. I've received calls from her family members, her 13-year-old kid, her mom, her dad, and her siblings. Once, they even sent messages about attending a funeral for a family member. A few months ago, I got a call from her actual doctor checking up on her. When I look up the numbers, they all come from the same state and a few specific counties. I suspect Gina's getting her number confused with mine, but how she ends up with my new number every time I change it is beyond me. Her family doesn't believe me, they seem to think I am Gina and just don't remember. It's been years of this now. I've even told Gina's daughter that I can't pick her up from school because I'm not Gina, but the calls keep coming. If I changed my number again, I feel they'd just contact me again somehow. So, yeah, I'd really like to know who this Gina person is. Back when I was a college student on spring break in Daytona, I had this strange encounter. There was a young lady who was eyeing me all day. She was cute, so I thought I'd go over and chat with her. We talked for a bit, and then she said she had to catch up with her friends, who were getting in the car. I didn't get her number, which I later regretted. The next day, I went to the same beach around the same time, and there she was again, giving me the same look. So, I went over to talk to her, but she acted like she didn't recognize me at all. I knew for sure it was the same person since I'm good with faces. Still, we chatted again, But when my friends and I went bar hopping, I didn't bother asking for her number because something felt a little off. Then, on the third day, she found me again, this time at a different beach. She walked up with an older man, introduced him as her dad, and introduced me by name. Her dad was wearing a full suit and dress shoes, on the beach. He asked a lot about my life and educational goals. I was pre-med at the time. The conversation was mainly between him and me while she stood there, beaming at me. He eventually said nice to meet you, shook my hand, and kissed her on the forehead before leaving. At that point, I was freaked out. She was acting a little too strange, so I told her I'd see her tomorrow and left. The whole time, though, we hadn't exchanged numbers or set a place to meet. I avoided the beaches on my last day and headed out of Florida. Years later, when I watched Get Out, it gave me chills, and I instantly thought of that spring break trip. I'll probably never know what that whole thing was about, but I don't really want to find out. I work at Starbucks, and we had a regular customer who used to come in once a week or so. She'd order a drink, and she always had someone with her, a younger man who would just sit there. They never talked. She'd drink her drink and play on her phone, while he sat quietly next to her. I assumed they were a couple, though there was a notable age difference. She looked to be in her mid to late 50s, always wearing makeup and styled blonde hair, while he seemed to be in his late 20s or early 30s with long brown hair and glasses. Then one day, she came in by herself. And on the next few visits, she was still alone. During a casual chat as I was making her drink, I asked, "Where's the guy that's usually in here with you?" She looked at me, a bit surprised, and asked, "My husband?" I said, "Sure, I guess," and then she paused and replied, "I don't think he's ever come in here with me." She explained that they lived an hour away, and she usually stopped in on her way home from work. I was a little taken aback and clarified, "I mean the guy with the long brown hair and glasses." Her face changed completely, with this mix of sadness, confusion, and maybe even a bit of fear. I handed her the drink, and she just turned and walked out without saying anything. I thought it was strange and mumbled, "Well, that was odd." A coworker overheard and asked what happened. I explained, and they responded, "You mean the lady who orders the Earl Grey with soy? I'm pretty sure she's always been by herself." I asked another coworker if they remembered her ever coming in with anyone, and they, too, only remembered her being alone. After that day, I never saw her again. Ever since I was young, I've loved scary movies, ghosts, monsters, the whole deal. I like them because they're just movies, just a little spook. But I mean, I wouldn't doubt that ghosts could be real, since I've had some strange shared experiences. My whole family loves scary movies, except my dad. As long as I can remember, he's never liked them. I always assumed it was just his taste, and maybe he just didn't like being scared. But I always had this feeling there was something deeper to it, even if I couldn't quite figure it out. When I was younger, I'd sometimes ask him if there was more to his dislike of scary movies. Every single time, he'd dodge the question or try to change the subject. But one day, he finally decided to tell me a little. He said he did a Ouija board with his parents, brother, and uncles at their house, and something happened. He didn't go into details, he said he didn't want to talk about it, and that was it. At first, I thought he was just saying that to keep me from asking more, and it worked for a while. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I remembered how, every time we went to that house for a family get-together, the place always felt off, somehow. It's a feeling I still can't explain. My parents are close and usually don't keep secrets from each other, so I went to my mom, hoping she'd know if he was just teasing me. But she had no idea. She said he'd never mentioned it to her either. Fast forward to Christmas that year, and on the drive to my grandmother's house, I decided to try asking him again. I figured since we were all in the car, maybe he'd feel like he couldn't dodge the question. But no, he sighed and told me and my sister, very seriously, to forget about it and to never, under any circumstances, ask my grandmother about it. I think he thought that would put an end to my curiosity, but it just made me want to know more. As soon as we got to my grandmother's, I ran to my cousins and told them everything I knew. One of my cousins asked her dad, my uncle, about it on the drive home, and she told me he went from chatting and laughing to a blank, serious expression. He got quiet, asked her firmly how she knew, and then told her never to bring it up again, especially to our grandmother. Today, I still don't know what happened, and I don't think I ever will. It may not be the biggest mystery out there, but it's one I can't help wanting to solve. I was 19, and my mom, dad, and I were headed from Minneapolis to Chicago to visit my grandparents for Thanksgiving. We stopped for lunch at a restaurant in Tomah, Wisconsin. The trip was rough, my parents' marriage was strained, and if they weren't sitting in silence, They were arguing. They started up again as we were leaving, so I went outside to wait for them. It was snowing, and the sky matched my mood. It was cold and quiet, which felt better than standing in the heat of their argument. An elderly woman approached me. She wore a brown fur coat and was shorter than me by about 2 inches. She seemed confused and said she couldn't find her son, asking if I'd help her. I glanced back into the restaurant, saw my parents still arguing, and asked her, "Where did you last see him?" She told me he'd picked her up from the Amtrak station, and they had stopped here to eat, but he went to get the car, and she couldn't find him. The Amtrak mention puzzled me. She wore expensive jewelry and that coat, which seemed unusual for someone arriving by train. Still, she seemed very distressed, so I said, "Don't worry, we'll find him. It's a small parking lot." She thanked me and took my arm. We started walking to the left, since we were already at one end of the parking lot. Then she stopped me, saying, "No, I think he's over there," and pointed ahead to a small grassy hill that separated the restaurant from a hotel. Confused, I asked if they were staying there. "No, but I'm sure he's over there," she insisted, gripping my arm more tightly and losing the confused expression she had before. Just then, I heard my mother angrily calling my name. "Jenny! What are you doing? Get over here, we're leaving." I turned to explain, I was just helping this lady. But when I turned back, she was gone. I asked my mother if she'd seen her, but she just looked at me, saying she had no idea what I was talking about. Several years later, while standing with a friend near our office after happy hour, a guy approached us in a similar, confused way. He then tried to mug us. Since then, I've been cautious about people using a seemingly vulnerable situation to get close enough to touch me. Looking back, I think about that woman trying to lead me toward the hotel's parking lot and how if my parents had argued just a little longer, they might not have seen me again. Even though I had a strong feeling something was off, I didn't want to be rude and not help. I have no doubt now that someone was probably waiting for her, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't anyone planning Thanksgiving dinner with their mother. Still an unsettling memory.